So hello guys, welcome to the video. So in this video we'll solve the question set matrix zeros. Alright, so we'll code this question in Java, and firstly I will explain you the question and then we will try to solve it. Alright, so let's jump on the board and I will explain you the question. So the question is, we are given a matrix in which we are given a row and column of the size of the matrix, and inside which we are given the elements of the matrix. So let me take the elements of the matrix as 1 0 only. We can take any random elements. It's not compulsory to take 1 0 1 0 1 0 only. Alright, it's just for better understanding. I will take 1 0 1 0 only, and yes, it will be faster for me to make you understand. Alright, so what we have to do, we have to first create the array, and inside this array we will see that if there is a 0 inside this array. Alright, so firstly I will explain you by this example only. So if there is a 0 inside this array, alright, so what we have to do, we have to convert that row inside which 0 is kept and convert that column inside which 0 is kept into 0 only. If there is a 0 in this row, so we have to convert the whole row into 0. If there is a 0 in column, we have to convert this whole column into 0 only. Alright, so I hope you understood this, what we have to do. So if I take another example, let me create another example. I will remove this 0. I'll mark this 0 here. Alright, so this is 0. So what we will do, we will see that there is a 0. So I'll mark all the elements of that row in which 0 is kept as 0 only. Alright, and then I will see that if the 0 is kept in the column, I'll mark that whole column, I'll convert that whole column into 0 only, or I'll say I'll convert all the elements into 0, and we have to return this. We do not have to return this, we have to just modify the original matrix only. Alright, so this is our row and this is our column, and we have to return this original matrix as the answer. Alright, if this is the example. Alright, so I hope you understood the question now. So let me recreate the question. Something happened here. Alright, so let me just fix it out. Alright, so let me create this array again. Alright, so now let me create this array again, because I guess there was some glitch in this board. So I'll create another example for you guys for more better understanding. So what can we do? Can we try a brute force approach? And inside that brute force approach, what we'll do, I'll create a copy of the size of this array, and then I'll traverse this array one by one and see if there is a 0, and if I come on a 0, then I'll create that whole row as 0 and convert that whole column into 0. Same for this element, so I will convert the whole column in 0 and whole row into 0. Other elements are as it is only. Alright, so I have to give this as an answer, but there is a problem in this approach. We are using extra space and we are creating an extra array, so obviously the space complexity will get increased. So we have to modify this array only, and we can't create another space for us. Alright, for this question, so this approach will not be fine for us. Can I think about a more optimized approach? Yes. So can I do one thing? Let me just recreate it. Alright, instead of a big array or instead of a copy array, can I create a small 1D array as our row and a small 1D array as our column? Alright, and for row and columns, we will mark inside these extra arrays that if there is a 0 in that column or not. Alright, so if there is a 0 in this row, so I'll mark here, otherwise I will not mark here. Alright, if there is a 0 in this row, I will not mark here. If there is a 0 in this row, yes, I will mark it here. Or let me mark it with green pen. If there is a 0 in this row, yes, I will mark it here. If there is a 0 in this column, yes, I will mark it here. If there is a 0 in this column, I will mark it here. And other all are left. Alright, and at last, what we will do, we will traverse this array and this 1D array and see on which indexes there is a tick mark. And if there is a tick mark, I will convert that in a whole row into zeros only. Right, so it happened again. Maybe I'm creating a mistake. Alright, so I recreated the array again. And what was I explaining, that if there is a tick mark in this array, so I will mark this whole row as 0. And I will mark, if there is a tick mark in this row array, so I will mark this whole column as 0. Same with this and same with this. Alright, so finally I get my answer. But in this also, we are using an extra space of 2 1D arrays. Alright, so 2 1D arrays will also cost us some extra space. We just have to modify this array only. We can't take an extra space to optimize it. Alright, so how can we do that? Let me first erase this array, or wait, I will just copy it and paste it here. And let me erase this array. Alright, so can I do one thing? If I use this same approach but with some optimization, then what? If I create these two arrays, this 1D array and this 1D array, inside our original array only, then what? So I'll create this 1D array inside our first column of our array, and every time I will get a 0, so I'll mark in this array, this first index array only, or first column only, or first row only. So I'll create our first column and first row as a duplicate index, or as a visited index, or as a marked index. Alright, you can say anything. Alright, so now let me take the example first. Take 1 1 1 0 1 1 1 1 0 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1. Alright, so in this case I have to follow these I have to follow some few steps for it, and the few steps will be, let me write the steps here. The first step is check if there is 0 in first row or not. Alright, and same for second step, but I'll change something. Obviously I have to change something. We have to just change the name, that it is not row now, it is column. So I have to check. The first two steps are check if there is 0 in first row or not, that means this first row, and check if there is a 0 in first column or not. Alright, so if I get a 0 in this first row, I will create a variable, let's say row check, and mark this as true. And if I get a 0 in first column, so I'll create a variable, and these are boolean variables, I'll mark it as true. Alright, because we will use it afterwards. Alright, now these two, this row and this column is done. So now what we will do, we are left only with this array, so we have to traverse the remaining array. So my third step is traverse the remaining array, and I will just short this out. Alright, so I'll traverse the remaining array and wait one thing and check that if there is 0 or not. Alright, now the main step, if found, or let me write, if 0 is found. If 0 is found, then what we have to do, if 0 is found, then mark it in first column or row. No, column and row both. Alright, so now what we will do, my third step is to, so let me first write the steps, then I will explain you all the steps together. So I'll add this also as shorter. Alright, now the fourth step. After this third step, I will see that I have now some zeros and zeros in our first row and first column. So I have to fill my array with 0 where expected. Alright, where expected means where I have to keep 0. Alright, by the condition which we are given in question. Now the last step, fifth step, my last step is, now I have filled the array. Now I will check that if row check or column check, which we created here, row check and column check is 0 or not. Sorry, is not 0, is true or false. If true, then if it is true, then mark that row and column as 0. So I'll shorter this out so it will be easier for you to read it. Alright, so these are my 5 steps. In this 5 step, what is happening, I will explain you one by one. So firstly, I will go and check if there is 0 in my first row or not. So inside this first row, if there is a 0 or not, yes, there is a 0. So now my row check will be true. Alright, done. Now I will check that if there is 0 in my first column or not. So there is no 0 in my first column, so my column check will remain false. Alright, now traverse the remaining array and check that if there is 0 or not. Alright, so I'll traverse this remaining array and I'll check that if there is 0 in it. Yes, so I found a 0 here, and yes, I found 0. So I have written a condition. If 0 is found, make it in first column, mark it in first column and row both. If 0 is found here, mark it in my first column. So I'll mark 0 it in my first column, 0 in my first column, and 0 in my first row. Mark it in first column and row both. Alright, so I have marked it both of the side. Now fill my array with 0 where expected. So there is only 1 0. So now I have to fill my array with zeros. Alright, so I'll fill my array with zeros. That means wherever there is a 0 in my first row, so I'll create that whole column in zeros only. And wherever there is 0 in my first column, I'll convert that whole row into 0 only. Alright, and now it's done. Then we will check that inside it is left, there is again a 0 here, so we will convert this here also. Alright, now for the last step I will check that if row check and column check is true or false. So row check is true and column check is false. So row check is true. Row check means if row check is true, that means if it is true, then mark that row and column as 0. So if row check is true, then I have to mark this whole row as 0, and that whole column is already 0. Alright, so now the question is done, and this is the final answer for this question. And these are the 5 steps which you have to follow for this question, and I hope you understood the explanation part. So now we will go to the Nados website and code this explanation part. So we will jump onto the website and code this out in Java. So firstly I will create my row and column. So I'll write matrix dot length and matrix 0 dot length in column. Alright, after this I will create that boolean variable of name row check, and I initialize it with false, and boolean column check, and again initialize it with false. Alright, so now here I will start my steps. So my first step is to check if there is 0 in my first row or not, and check if there is 0 in my first column or not. So I will write int I is equals to 0, starting from 0 to n. I will check a condition that if there is a 0 in my first column or not. If there is a 0 in my first column, so I'll mark column check is equals to true. Same, I will copy the code and write here just for row, but this time I have to change my parameters, and here also I have to switch this I. Alright, so I hope you understood it till now. So these are the 2 first steps we have done before. Now we have to traverse the remaining array and check that if there is a 0 or not. So I'll write traverse the remaining array. So I'll traverse my remaining array starting from 1 to n. I incremented. After this I'll again write a for loop for j till m, and j should be incremented, and inside this I have to check if it is 0 or not. So if any of the element of this matrix is 0, then I will mark, if 0 is found, I will mark it in first column and first row both. So I will mark in the first column and first row both. Alright, so this is done. Now the next step, fill my array with 0 where expected. Alright, so very simple. What I will do, I will fill the array. First I will fill it for the row, and then I will fill it by columns. So I'll take I from 1 till n I plus plus. Then at first I will check that in that row if there is matrix 0, matrix I 0, that means column is single. So yeah, I'll take matrix I comma 0. So it will check inside my first column that if there is a 0 or not. If yes, there is a 0, so I will again run a for loop starting from j 0 till jm, and j is incremented. Inside this I'll mark that whole row as 0. So I'll mark that whole row as 0 and I'll write that whole row as ij. Alright, so I'll just copy this loop and I'll paste it down, because this loop will be somewhat similar to what I have to write now. Cut this out and I'll paste it inside this loop. After this I'll write 0 and j. Alright, so now I will check for first row, and inside first row if there is a 0, then the whole first column will become 0. Alright, so I hope you understood it till now, and if you understood it till now, then you have understood the question itself, because we have left with only the last step now, and the last step is check that if row check or column check is true or false. Alright, so we will write a condition. If my row check is true, and if my column check is true, then I'll write something. And inside this, what I will write, if true, then mark that row and column as 0. So if it is true, then what I have to do, I have to mark that whole row. If row check is true, so I have to mark that whole initial row as true. So what I will do, I will run my for loop from j0 to m j plus plus, and what I will do, I will insert zeros inside that column, or sorry, that row, that column. Alright, now same condition for column check also, just there is a difference that it will run till only n and it will be j comma 0. Alright, so I hope you understood the code, and if you understood the code, then what we have to do, we can run this code now and we'll see that if it gives successful answer, yes, so it is compiled successfully. Now I have to submit the code and see if all the test cases are passed. Alright, so all test cases are passed completely. So I hope you understood the code and the solution completely, and if you understood everything, then do like the video, subscribe our YouTube channel, and do share it with your friends, and we will meet you in the next video. So till then, take care. Thank you so much.